Thank you for joining me today. So this is a bit different to my normal training videos. This isn't about formulas, features, or learning new tools. This is about understanding why office work gets messy in the first place. Because most of the time, it's not a lack of skill. It's the way our brains respond to pressure, decisions, and uncertainty. And once you understand that, everything starts to make a lot more sense. Today, we are going to look at the psychology of working in an office. More of the why, not the how. I feel bad for saying it out loud, but honestly, 9 times out of 10, the tool is not the problem. We often assume that being better at work means learning more tools, more techniques, more systems. But a lot of the time, the issue isn't knowledge, it's behaviour. It's how we respond when we're busy, when we're overwhelmed, or when we're unsure what to do next. Our brains are wired to look for the easiest, quickest option in the moment. And those small choices, repeated over time, are what create messy files, full inboxes, and overcomplicated work. So this session is about stepping back and understanding those patterns, understanding our deep-rooted why. Because once you can see those behaviours and recognise those feelings, you can start to change them. Let's start with inboxes. If your inbox feels like it's constantly growing, it's easy to assume you just need to be more organised. But what's actually happening here is something called decision fatigue. Every email represents a small decision. Do I reply now, later, or not at all? Do I file this, delete it, or keep it visible? Individually, those decisions feel small, but when you have hundreds of emails, they quickly add up. The key things to understand here is for all of us. The brain has a limited capacity for decision making. So when that capacity gets overloaded, it starts to avoid decisions altogether. That's why emails get left even when they're not that difficult. It's not laziness, it's cognitive overload. So the goal isn't to become more organised, it's to reduce the number of decisions your brain has to make. Let's remove the overload and hence remove the problem. Clean up long email threads so you're not reprocessing the same conversation. Bulk file older emails so they're out of sight but still accessible. And automate anything repetitive like notifications and meeting updates. You're not fixing your inbox, you're reducing the mental load behind it. On the screen, I have 3 practical step-by-step guides on how you can actually do that. What actions to take. Understanding what is going wrong is step 1. Step 2 is taking action so that it doesn't remain a burden forever. Next, file names. This might seem like a small thing, but it's a perfect example of how we think about time. When we name files poorly, it's usually because we're prioritising speed in the moment. We just want to save and move on. And this links to something called temporal discounting. We, and I include myself in here, because I too have spent nearly an hour looking for one blasted file, which I know exists somewhere. We value immediate convenience more than future clarity. So we choose a quick, vague name now and assume we'll deal with it later. But later never comes. There is always more to do, and even if you do carve out time, the context has gone. A naming convention that felt logical at the time is lost. So what feels like a time saver actually creates more work in the long run. The shift here is to think slightly ahead. Name files so they're clear without any extra context. Use a consistent structure. Rename them immediately and do a quick clarity check. This isn't about being organised for the sake of it or becoming a slave to a routine. It's about reducing friction every time you come back to your work. I've provided 3 options, all of which I have implemented. They work fantastically for me and I'm sure they will do for you too. Now let's look at why we tend to add more instead of simplifying. This shows up everywhere. More columns, more slides, more wording, more detail, and it feels like we're improving things, which is a good thing, right? Value add at every point. Well, no, actually, what's actually happening is linked to loss aversion. As humans, we're wired to avoid loss more than we value gain. So removing something feels risky. What if that detail was important? What if someone asks for it later? Adding feels safe, removing feels uncomfortable, so we keep everything just in case. But over time, that creates clutter, and clutter increases cognitive load, which makes everything harder to read, understand, and use. So the shift here is to become more comfortable with removing. Before you add something, ask what can come out. Look at your work and identify what isn't essential. What does no one ever ask questions about? What data has been updated or replaced with new information? Because clarity doesn't come from including everything. It comes from making deliberate choices about what to leave out. Let's simplify and provide everyone more brain space. Again, 3 suggestions for you. Mantras if you like, and honestly, your colleagues and customers will thank you for implementing these too. Let's talk about slides. We often hear death by PowerPoint, but in truth, I find lots of people are killing themselves off unintentionally. A lot of people believe that more detail makes a presentation better. But in reality, it often has the opposite effect. This links back to something we have already mentioned, called cognitive load theory. Our brains can only process a limited amount of information at once. When a slide is full of text, visuals, and data, it overloads that capacity. And instead of understanding more, the audience actually understands less. Confusion reigns, panic even at having to try and read the whole slide before the presenter moves. Did you miss something? Was it important? Have you ever asked if the slide pack is going to be shared afterwards? Has anyone ever asked that about your presentations? This issue also feeds into something called proof of effort bias. We tend to believe that if something looks detailed, it must have taken effort and therefore must be valuable. But your audience doesn't experience your effort. They have no idea how many hours so spent slaving away. They only experience your output. So the shift here is to design for how people process information, not how much you can include. Keep one clear message per slide, reduce text to simple phrases, and use visuals to guide attention, because clarity isn't about how much you say. It's about how easily it can be understood. 3 top tips. I'm a sucker for a winning format. Finally, let's look at urgency. This is one of the biggest traps in day-to-day work, and honestly, it's something I personally have to work really hard at. We often feel productive because we're busy, answering messages, responding quickly, ticking off small tasks. I love a tick list. We feel like that because urgent tasks trigger a dopamine response. They give us a quick sense of reward and completion. But that doesn't always mean they're meaningful. It just means we are busy. And I hate to say it, but sometimes we are just being busy fools. This situation also creates what's known as the urgency bias. We prioritise what feels immediate over what actually matters long term. So we spend our time reacting rather than progressing, putting out fires, sometimes other people's fires, actioning work for he who shouts loudest, and not actually the main priority. The shift here is to slow that process down slightly. When you look at a task, ask whether it moves something forward or just keeps things ticking over. Separate urgent from important, and where you can, create protected time for focused work, because real progress usually comes from the things that don't feel urgent. Focus time has been a game changer for me. My phone is on mute, my coffee cup is full, I've even been for a wee beforehand, and by hook or by crook, the most important task is being tackled, without distractions. I hope you have found this presentation helpful. If you take one thing from this session, let it be this. Most of the challenges we face at work aren't technical, They're behavioural. They come from how we respond to pressure, decisions, and uncertainty. And the good news is behaviour can be changed. Not all at once and not perfectly, but through small, consistent shifts. And those small shifts are what make work feel clearer, calmer, and more manageable. You can absolutely do this. Just take the first small step.